Well, hey, everybody. I'm here with Doug Kemper of the Colorado Water Congress. Doug, I can tell you there's a lot of people in Douglas County, they don't know your name. They don't, I know, shocker. But they don't know what the Water Congress does here in Colorado. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about the Water Congress, what they've done in the past, what they do today.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question. And my name again is Doug Kemper, and I'm the executive director of the Colorado Water Congress. And the Water Congress was created in 1958 by the governor of the state, Governor Steve McNichols, who was a Democrat, and Attorney General Duke Dunbar. You probably don't know that name, but he was our longest serving Attorney General. He was a Republican. And with the full support of the Colorado legislature, they realized that we needed to have an organization that spoke for the water community. We have state agencies, such as primarily the Colorado Water Conservation Board, that sets policy, water policy for the state, and they deal with state-to-state interactions. They also fund water projects. There didn't at that time exist an organization that truly represented the water users. Oregon had one, Utah had one, but we didn't have a centralized voice for those that own water rights and deal with water professionally every day. So they created the organization in 1958, and we are governed by a 34-member board from all over the state, all different kinds of water usage and types of use, and so that's what we're created to do. We put on the two largest conferences related to water in the state, our annual one that we just finished up today, and we do a summer one in August. And those, we have anywhere from 300 to 600 folks there, water professionals, that work in water each and every day, where we keep everybody current on what's going on. The other two things that you should know is that we also work very heavily with the Colorado legislature. And so we have a state affairs committee that meets every Monday morning through the legislative session, which runs from mid-January to mid-May, 120 days. So we have about 100 people typically online that review the 30 to 40 pieces of water legislation that we typically see every year. 7 to 8% of all bills introduced in the Colorado legislature have a water tie every year, in addition to all the other things they're doing. Yeah. So we review those, and then I kind of look at it more as like we're advisors to the legislature on these things. So we usually will have 3 or 4 or 5 legislators that attend our meetings. We discuss the bills that they're doing, discuss what issues that may be related to those bills. And we typically take positions on those bills, and about 80 to 85%, George, of what we support gets signed into law. And almost never do we have a bill that we oppose get signed into law. Just a side plug for our legislature. We have, I think, and I work with a lot of other states around the West. Yeah. We have, I think, the best legislature in the West, and I brag on them constantly. They don't go off the rails on water issues. They may introduce some things that are like, what? But we just don't have we have a legislature that really stays right where they need to be. Doesn't matter if the Republicans or the Democrats are in control. We're nonpartisan, but we've really been very fortunate over the years to have a legislature that cares about water, and that's really huge. One last thing the organization does, as I mentioned, we also work on the federal level through a group called the National Water Resources Association. Most of the western states, almost all, have an organization similar to ours, and that organization works on water issues in DC. So that's mainly what we focus on. I think I skipped over the question you asked me, who am I? I've been running the Colorado Water Congress. I'm executive director. I've been in that position for coming on 17 years now. And for 20 years prior to that, I was the Aurora Water Resources Manager. So I was responsible for acquisition and management and planning for all of the city's water supplies for 20 years. I have a bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering and water resources engineering. So that's a little bit about who I am.
All right, well, the people of Douglas County know the name of Doug Kemper.
Now they do.
And they know what the Colorado Water Congress does. Doug, what is the state of water in Colorado? Simple question, probably not a simple answer, how would you couch that for the people of Douglas County?
We used to have this phrase, George, that was like, the state of Colorado is determined by the state of our water. And when we were first created, that it was just water was the most important thing that we do in the state, period. So currently, we've certainly experienced a lot of growth. That gets a lot of media attention. We have climate change is a big issue for a lot of people, whether you say it's man-induced or you say it's just natural cycles. From a water manager's standpoint, it doesn't matter what the cause is, it's the reality of that you have to face on variable water supplies, which we've lived with in Colorado for as long as human beings have been here. The archaeological record shows that, and just our more recent data shows that we have a very variable water supply and are prone to long and extended droughts. Now, when I first came in this field, in 1980, when I was first really actively engaged on it, we went through a 20-year period where we never really experienced serious drought in this state. And so everybody that came in with my generation in the early days, really, they knew about the drought from the 50s, and the 30s, but we didn't experience it. And so that changed in the last 20 years, which has been radically different. So when I look at the last 40 years of most of my career, I look at the first 20 has been relatively abundant supplies, some variability, not too bad. I look at the last 20 years, serious drought, serious super wet years, 2013, yep. Big floods, you remember those. And so it's just, we seem to, certainly in the last 20 years, have had a lot of variability. Today, when we think about our water supplies, and there's always a question, do we have enough? Well, the answer is that's all we got. And so we learn to manage and deal with that water, and the primary way we do that is through water storage. And in Colorado, almost 80% or so of our water supply is coming off of snowmelt. And so we rely very heavily on that, but our snowmelt comes in about a 6-week period, 6-7 weeks. It's coming earlier, and that thing I've certainly have observed, that it's coming 2-3 weeks earlier than it did when I first started my career. And we just see earlier peaks and earlier runoff, making storage that much more important, because now that runoff is coming earlier in the summer, but we keep using water throughout the year. In municipal, indoors is pretty constant all year round. And summer, but we're still irrigating in August and September, our farmers need that water supply as well. So when we think about, farmers are much more used to dealing with extremes and cycles and water year to year and through the year. Us that live in the city, we're a little fussier. We want to be able to turn that tap on and there's the water. Just like the electricity here, we want it to be working all the time, without exception. If my internet goes out, I'm like, we get upset really quick. Yeah. And so we expect that water, especially on the municipal side, on the domestic providers, we expect to have that water on all the time. So when we think about, do we have enough water, cities are constantly planning ahead. Most of our major cities, what you'll see is that their demand has been very flat or even declining as population has been increasing.
Right,
and
yeah, we heard about that.
Yeah. So why is that? Because when I first started, I'm like, man, if we could get people to cut like 10% of our demand, man, that would be a huge success. You know, we thought that's what conservation was all about. And in 2002, when we hit the drought here now 20 years ago, that first bad drought year, I was almost literally in tears when people were dropping their water use 25, 30% plus, which made a huge difference in our storage levels. But people do respond very well to drought. When they see water, when they see that water supplies are scarce, they're really good at responding to that. Average citizens don't get enough credit for it, and it's really unfortunate, George, that we don't talk about the accomplishments that we've had. So yeah.
Well, that's the thing. We're going through a process to try to fund projects in Douglas County with the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Act plan, American Rescue Plan Act funds, ARPA funds, and a lot of those are municipal or at least residential-oriented systems. So obviously, I've got ranchers in my district in Douglas County. They got a different story in dealing with drought and the challenges that come in. I want to talk a little bit about storage, though, and for I think a lot of urban-level dwellers, even in Castle Rock, which is still a nice, big, small town, but Parker, Lone Tree, a little more metropolitan. What's the big deal about storage? Why can't, if storage is the issue, well, why don't we just build more storage? Can you, I know some of the answers that make that a challenge, but I'd like to hear from you. What are those challenges we see just to increase that storage?
Sure. So the main problem with storage is, and you can think of it in two different ways. One is storage that's on the river. We call that on-channel storage, where you're damming a river and you're backing water up over the stream bed. The other is called off-channel storage. So Aurora Reservoir is an example of an off-channel reservoir. Reuter Hess is an example of an off-channel reservoir. And Frank Yeagers, you know, worked his tail off for decades to get that, and to figure out where the money was coming from to get that done was a minor miracle. But he almost single-handedly made that reservoir happen, and just amazing. So the permitting, when we have to, water projects have to go through a federal permitting process, and it's much, much harder if that reservoir is on channel. It's almost impossible now to build a reservoir on any kind of major stream. It's got to be off channel in some type of natural depression where the stream flow is intermittent. We call that ephemeral streams. I love that word. So it's much easier to build the reservoirs such as Reuter Hess, Aurora Reservoir, where they're off channel. We take the water from streams using existing infrastructure, existing pipes, existing systems, and deliver that to those reservoirs. And so that's, it's very difficult though, and the permitting process to get a reservoir built these days is decades long, and the number of different players that get involved in that and the different things that you have to consider and interact with on the state, federal, and local permitting is huge.
Okay. What about something I heard through CCI, Colorado Counties Incorporated, and that I know is going on in Greeley. They are doing, they have a project going to actually have aquifer storage, where they take the water in, they treat it, and then they drop it back down into the aquifer. We actually, in Castle Rock and Dominion Water District, have a well. They're trying to do the same thing up in our Founders neighborhood. Where do you see the future of that going? What are the current results, do you think?
Sure. So in the Denver Basin, and there's different kinds of aquifers, and those that have a little bit of knowledge on water and aquifers know that there's kind of these deeper aquifers, and there are ones that are just kind of alluvial, they're kind of next to the stream. So the aquifers you're talking about are primarily the Denver Basin aquifers, and they sit like stacked bowls of the Laramie Fox Hills at the bottom, and then Arapahoe, Denver, and Dawson formations, just like mixing bowls almost. And if you ever want to drive through an aquifer, as you go up I-70 right there as you're leaving the city and going starting up that hill, there's some little trails right there around Morrison where you can interact with your aquifer if you want to.
Wow,
but
really?
that's where the aquifers recharge. So they're naturally, they're these bowls, and they naturally come and tip up. And where they tip up, that's where the precipitation that falls goes into those aquifers and has for millions of years.
Yeah.
So it takes a long time to recharge those aquifers, so we think of that as a non-renewable resource. And so, especially in the South Metro area, who initially relied very heavily on that supply, which is about their only choice they could. As we looked at how South Metro area developed and what Castle Rock was and Franktown, there just weren't many sources. There weren't any options, especially for a little community that's a couple hundred people. What are you going to do? Build? You don't have the money. You have the resources. You got to use what you can access. So these reservoirs, sitting like stacked bowls, and are under pressure, because they're recharged over here, and that puts these, when you're at the bottom part of the basin that you are in Castle Rock, you're at the lowest point, and if you want to be anywhere, that's where you want to be. And as you're drilling any wells down into that resource, you typically now manage that for 100-year life is what we typically think of it as. But they recharge more slowly. They can also have more immediate impacts, and when you're pumping, sometimes the level goes down a little faster than that 100 years, so that's really the challenge that the South Metro area now faces, is replacing that source of supply, and is certainly doing great work in that area.
Well, I know in Castle Rock we really try. I actually got into elected office because, as upset as I was about my HOA, I was really more upset about my water bill, and how I watched it double over the 20 years I lived in Castle Rock. And then really learning that detail, learning that, hey, we've got great access to Fox Hills in Douglas County, specifically in Castle Rock, but it's 83 degrees and it's salt water, essentially. And so managing our wells going into the Denver Basin, going into the Arapahoe Aquifer, and then of course avoiding wells into the upper and lower Dawson, which are the residential water source for a lot of our rural neighborhoods in Douglas County. And of course, we know that the Dawson, both upper and lower, have been threatened for really 2 generations now. And so managing that is something I know we work really hard on in the water districts in Douglas County. What about renewable water sources? Because that was the mantra that was preached to me from my very first day being sworn in on the Castle Rock Council, of pursuing renewable resources. We know Dominion water that serves Sterling Ranch in Douglas County are above 50% renewable, and that's kind of by law. We know Castle Rock, if you count the Wise water they get in, is really around 30%. And of course, Parker is investing a lot of time and effort to bring in those renewable water resources. Sure. So, simple question, why the bother? Why go to, if we're sitting on such great groundwater in Douglas County, why pursue renewable water resources? And then what are the inherent challenges that you hear about as heading up the Colorado Water Congress with those?
Sure. Well, it's all about looking towards the future, isn't it, George? It's all about, if we see this disaster coming eventually, that when those wells run dry and you've got, what's the average home price been doing in Denver?
Average home price in Douglas County is $800,000.
There you go. So we can't run those communities out of water, period. It just can't happen. And I think when John Hickenlooper was mayor of Denver, he was really the first one, in fact, ran on that platform when he was running for mayor, that we need to do more to work with between Denver and the suburbs. But prior to that, going back to people like Quig Newton and the mayors that was in the mayor in the 50s, late 40s, all the way, you just didn't see that outreach from Denver to its suburban communities. And John Hickenlooper made this statement, and I had his sign in my yard when he was running, at the time, and because I'm thinking, I haven't heard this from a mayoral candidate. This is when he was going through his primary, and I'm like, none of the other candidates they're all like, we got to protect Denver. We can't, we're all focused about Denver. The world ends at the city limits. Meanwhile, you're trying to build an airport in Adams County, and meanwhile, you've got this recognition that if you have if the South Metro area runs out of water, that news doesn't stop at the Denver city limit this way either. That if you're in a situation where this is everybody's problem, and we need to work on it. About the same time, you had Chips Berry, who came in to run the Denver Water Board, and you had a completely different. I was a big fan of Bill Miller, but before him. But when Chips came on, the attitude changed the Denver water almost instantly. And it was this, we've got to start working with Aurora, we've got to start working with our other municipalities around us. We're in pretty good situation in terms of our water supply, but we need to be able to start working with them, because if they go down, Denver is going with them. And that time there was concern about the economy. When was the last time we really were concerned about that we're going to fall off the table here economically? But back then, 20 years ago, 15, we were worried about that. And the work the attitude that changed there was this: let's do some more collaborative work that led to the WISE project that you just referenced, and much more sharing capacity and interconnections within the systems, and always more work to be done there. But there's always room to expand that, but we've really made, I think, tremendous progress in that in the last 2-3 decades.
Awesome. Want to touch on something that I know, well, we have a lot of people moving to Colorado. I could tell you we've got 5 people moving every day into Douglas County. Many of them are coming from other parts of the country. Can you tell us about this crazy thing we do here in Colorado called prior appropriation water law?
Sure, it's simple. It's the same way you get your seats at concerts, right? The first one that goes gets the best seat, and if you can't afford it, you buy one back further, and that's what you do. Water is the same way. It's that first in time, first in right. It has that sense of fairness. The first ones to go to the stream get that right, and they're the ones that the last one in is the first one out when there's the times of shortage. So, and that becomes somewhat of the problem when you have, even cities like Aurora, and that didn't develop its own water utility until the 1950s. And so for the first, Aurora was founded in 1890, took 60 years before they were a distributor of Denver water, in essence, for that whole period of time. So now when you come in 1950 on the South Platte River and try to acquire water, you're too late, way too late. The swing date on kind of the good water right, not good water right on the South Platte is 1885. Wow. 1885. And that's the Burlington Ditchhead Gate just down below the metro area. If you're not senior to that, your supply is going to have a lot of years you're not going to get water.
And so senior to that, so then just a little bit of tutorial here for some of the folks who may not know this because they lived out of state or they've just always lived within the Denver metro area. Senior water rights, junior water rights, secondary, Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so senior doesn't mean that older people like us get water first, but that's the way it should be.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Because we're the ones that get thirsty, and we can't carry around, have a harder time getting to water.
It's all the kids
Yeah,
that have
yeah.
the bottles anyhow.
Exactly, they all carry the water bottles around with them, and you know, they can't go anywhere without a water bottle.
That's right. That's right. Which is very helpful as a Boy Scout leader, but it's a little odd on a college campus to say.
Exactly. So senior water rights just means that if there's only a certain amount of water in the river, and you were there first, so you could use that. You're called a senior water right. You got there first. And as long as there's enough flow in the river to satisfy your appropriation there, it's fine. But now if there's less water in there and you've got a demand that's this, first off, you can't take more than is in the stream, can you? No, you can't. So you get as much as you can take, but if there's a whole, and the typical case is that you'll have a stream flow that's this big, and you have a lot of little folks that are taking water for irrigation or different purposes. And almost all of our senior water rights, by the way, are agricultural water rights. Why is that? Well, the reason is that in the early days, I mean, you know, we actually didn't even hardly have centralized water systems back then. We didn't start fully chlorinating our water till 1949 throughout the United States. So the idea being that municipal use really wasn't that big a deal. And we weren't really using that much water. So the agricultural water rights are really, and the mining rights also prior to that acquired those rights. Those are our senior water rights. They were the first ones to get in there. First it was kind of mining, then it was, we need to grow crops to feed the miners. So we need to irrigate in order to do that, especially around Greeley, which is kind of where it all started on the Platte. And so we needed we needed hay for the horses and the ox and everything. It's moving things around. And so that was, you know, we had the mining rights, then you had the agricultural rights, and then the municipal rights are really kind of at the back end of the bus.
Right, right. Well, and then we heard a couple sessions here this week talking about, well, what about recreational uses? Mm-hmm. And we heard they're even further down. We heard from a lovely young lady out of Grand Junction about the importance of maintaining the Colorado River for kayaking.
Yes.
And there is definitely that need, but then there's all these other things set by law that come before it here in Colorado. So I mentioned the Colorado River, and we heard a couple sessions today about the Colorado River Compact. What can you tell us about that? And it does kind of seem like we're heading towards a crisis there. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, let's talk about what a compact is first off. And Colorado was called the most compacted state in the nation. It's not because we're tiny and little compact, but because we have more agreements. We're the headwaters of mother of all rivers, really, right here in Colorado, because we're at the Continental Divide. So southly on the Platte River, the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, all the Colorado River tributaries, those are our major river basins. So we have 9 interstate compacts. So a compact is nothing more, and here I've got a copy of one here. This is the South Platte Compact. It's not very long, it's like 8 pages. It came out of a concept that said, there was a person, here we're going back to Greeley again, here's Delph Carpenter, an attorney, came up with a concept of how in the world, this is 1920, okay, this is 100 years ago, how in the world do we come up with this, we have other states that are attempting to place demands on Colorado. And we look at what Los Angeles is doing, running pipelines 200 miles over the desert to Owens Valley, and you're going, uh-oh. And you have all this water developing, irrigation in the San Joaquin Valley and Imperial Irrigation District developing water supplies there. And we're thinking, now we talked about senior water rights a moment ago. Right. So we were like, uh-oh, if all these other states that are growing, especially Southern California, that are growing much further faster and have a huge demand for water in the imperial irrigation that's supplying our vegetables through the winter, they're like, okay, they're gonna control our water, is what they're gonna do, and we're not gonna have a say about it at all. And if we want to try to, if we want to try to get into litigation or with them, they'll outspend us 100 to 1. We're just little Colorado.
So the compact was a way to protect our interests,
Yes.
to protect ourselves
Yes.
from these outside states, these outside cities from coming in and taking first dibs.
Exactly so. So what, and Delph Carpenter was, I'm out of adjectives for him, but what he was able to come up with was just pure genius. And his tenacity on making sure these things happened. So he was negotiating this whole big deal on the Colorado River. At the same time, he was working on the Platte and other compacts around. But the idea is, let's have the governors of the states appoint a representative, or maybe two, but a representative to sit down. Let's figure out what we want to do, and how we could fairly divide the waters, equitable apportionment of as best we can, and figure out how we can share this resource and avoid litigation. And we know it's 1920. We've got no stream gauges. They haven't been around for maybe 20 years, in some cases maybe a little bit longer. But we don't know how much water is really in the river. So he came up with this framework that where we would agree on how we're going to manage it. There were certain triggers and so forth, and how we were going to share the rivers. So in the case of the Colorado, which was the most famous, we date that back to 1922, although one of the 7 states, there were 7 states, Arizona didn't sign it till 1949, but we call it the 1922 Compact. So what they did was they had the 7 states, each with a couple representatives, gathered in Bishop's Lodge, New Mexico, not too far from Santa Fe. They got the Herbert Hoover, at that time, the Secretary of Commerce, cabinet level position, in 1920. They gathered together in November of 1922, 21, and sat down and said, we're nailing everybody's shoes to the floor, and we're not leaving until we got an agreement. Can you imagine today the Secretary of Commerce of the United States pulling 17 days off of his calendar to sit down with 7 states and try to negotiate something?
Right.
I can't even conceive of it.
Well, not to mention the train ride out from D.C., huh?
Right, because once you're there, you're kind of there. So, and it was kind of a little isolated, because they wanted to be a little isolated, because they didn't want all the media feeding frenzy that was going to happen related to that. So they sat down, and Carpenter was just tenacious. We are absolutely not guaranteeing anything to other states, but we are having a framework for how we're going to work together. And so they basically divided the river into in half, an upper basin and a lower basin. The upper basin essentially being Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah, and said, right, this was before, there was no Hoover Dam. There was
Barry Goldwater was still leading raft trips up and down the Colorado.
There you go. So you didn't have any of that. So they came up. We're going to divide the river at a place called Lee's Ferry, and then they ended up building Lake Powell above it, and they of course built Lake Mead below it. And so we have a framework for an agreement, and basically what we're, in short, saying that we'll agree to not cause a depletion in the river. Now we'll agree to, we being the upper basin states, such that we, over a 10-year average period, don't deplete the river, take more water than would allow a certain quantity to flow down. We're now well above that. Thanks to many good years, but the reservoirs, and that's what gets suppressed. Well, that's what reservoirs do, is they go up and down. If they were full all the time, well, what's the point of having one? Right. So they're always going up and down as we're managing those supplies. So after they sat and negotiated this, then they went through several years of getting that compact. 'Cause it's not just those guys can't agree. They can agree, but it doesn't mean nothing until it's signed and approved by every one of the 7 legislatures. Verbatim, not a comma different, not a word different, it's exactly. So can you imagine taking a document around to 7 different legislatures today and trying to get them to sign off on, well, we negotiated this agreement over here, hope it works for you. And can you imagine people blow up? And then once you get done with that, then you notify the president, hey, all the legislatures approved it, now you get to go to the US Congress, because they've got to also approve them.
So that's the Colorado Compact. What about the South Platte? Because we heard from the governor of Nebraska just a week ago, wanting to enforce, because he stated, we're not delivering as much water as we've promised. What do you think about that, Doug?
Well, as I just said, I mean, the real reason for these compacts is to get the states working together to avoid litigation. So work together, and also the second thing is these things are very hard to change. You just don't do it.
Yeah, going back to those legislatures, hey, can we change the comma? I'm sure. Yeah.
And Congress.
And Congress too, right.
Good luck with that. You're right. Governor Ricketts recently said, well, our compact with Colorado provides that we can build a canal that could take up to 500 cubic feet per second as a number. So how much is that? I mean, if you don't work in those numbers all the time. Yeah. So that's 1,000 acre feet a day. So how much is that? So think about Dillon Reservoir. Everybody's seen Dillon Reservoir. Yeah. So if you had 500 CFS flowing into one reservoir, so you could look at it all in one spot, it would be 1.5 times the size of Dillon Reservoir. Wow. If you're familiar with Blue Mesa when full, that would be roughly 1/3 of Blue. You go, that's a lot of water. Now, how much water is really there? Well, not that much. What does the compact say they can divert it? It's in the winter. It's from October 15th to April 1st. Is there much water in the river then? No.
It's still up in the mountains.
Well, exactly.
It's west of Fort Collins.
Right. So the compact is very specific. We have a certain delivery obligation during what we call the irrigation season, April through October. So we have a certain obligation there, but during the rest of the year we don't. And this compact only applies to the lower part of the river, which is basically, think of it as below Fort Morgan. So everything that happens upstream is all exempted from all that. So they can't force anybody to curtail water from that. So what they're going to, and the other thing is the compacts don't supersede federal law or state law. They've now got to go back and go through the Endangered Species Act. They're going to have to get a permit to construct the facility. They're going to have to do the engineering, how much water is there. There's a lot of sand hills of Nebraska. There's a lot of sandy soil through there. Are they going to have to line it? What's it going to cost? Are they going to really have the money? It can only be used in the compact for irrigation. Specific for that. It's not going down to Omaha. It can only be used for irrigation. So that's the idea. So my short answer is breathe. Just,
we're probably okay. We've got the long
right. This is a long-term thing. I understand from Nebraska's standpoint, hey, we see all this development happening in Colorado. There's a Colorado water plan that's going to develop a bunch of projects. What's that going to do to us? And so I think the governor's message has been, the Attorney General's office message has been, let's talk. If you think there's something that needs to happen here, let's talk and see what we can do. But the idea that we need to mass troops on our border here, that they're going to be, a line of caterpillars coming up the, big dozers coming up the highway here to start building a canal is just not reality.
well, first and foremost, I don't know. I'm going to have to figure out how to get in the line of all good things really do come from Greeley. But we're running out of time. We got plenty of water. We're running out of energy. And the boss over here tells me we got to wrap up. What would you like us to know? What would you like the people of Douglas County to know wrapping up? We just got done with the winter conference for the Colorado Water Congress. What's the message you'd like to leave them?
Okay, great. I think it's a fantastic question. First off, recognize the progress that you've made already. These things don't happen. There's no goal line where you're going to spike the ball and say, we've got it. We've dealt with our water issues. The price for our system that we have, of government that we have, is eternal vigilance, isn't it? It's constant listening, learning, and that commitment to learn about what's happening, just like we're doing here today. And I have, it's going to sound gratuitous, but I have a high level of trust in our county commissioners around the state. I've gotten part of my joy of my job is I get to work with county commissioners all across the state, and it's really just a fine bunch. And that sincerely care and are constantly looking ahead. I have never run across a county commissioner that doesn't think that way yet in my life. And so I think the idea is also there's some, well, we've got this. We're working on it. Don't believe don't believe everything you hear in the media or read on the internet. That we haven't run out of water yet. You don't see communities running out of water. It's because of at the local government level, especially, unless we haven't run. Let me correct that. We haven't run out of municipal water yet. Farmers are used to dealing with this, but you're not seeing communities running out of water. You're not seeing the crisis that's there. And I think the idea is that we've got really a lot of professionals now working in this field that are incredibly diverse, much more diverse than I came on, many more different points of view, and all of this work on consolidating and working on finding workable solutions has been great. Douglas County has been a leader in that. South Metro Water Supply Authority has been a leader in this area, and it's a joy to see it. Because when I started my career, I was like, how are they going to figure this? And you're making progress. You're going the right direction.
Well, all right. Well, thanks for that, Doug. My big hobby is I make beer. I'm a home brewer. And I've tried to equate how do you plan for water? A little bit like making beer, because you start by making beer by boiling up a bunch of sugary liquid or grain that you turn into sugars. And then you throw your yeast in and you leave it alone for a week or two, because it ain't beer yet. You got to let that beer create itself, really. And I always kind of feel like, planning for water is the same way. We do work now so that we actually have the wet stuff coming out of the faucet in 5-10 years.
Exactly.
Well, we need to wrap up. Doug, thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. Doug Kemper, Executive Director of the Colorado Water Congress. I'm George Teal. I'm one of the 3 Douglas County Commissioners. Thanks for joining us today. Y'all have a great one.